My name is Bonnie McClafferty, and welcome to Talking Food Safety, a GAIN interview cruncher and virtual conversation. I am GAIN's lead on food safety and chief of party of USAID's sponsored EatSafe project. I'm also your host and moderator for today's discussion. But before we move into our rich topic for today, a bit of housekeeping. So this is an engaging conversation, and we would really appreciate your participation. But to ask questions at any time during today's event, please click on the Zoom Q&A button, not chat, okay, the Q&A button. It's most useful for the conversation. And we will go through as many of your questions as possible and as time permits. Zoom translation is enabled, so please take time to adhere to and to use the Zoom translation functions. You will see on your screen right now these translations appearing with instruction. So thank you, everyone. I think we should move forward with our conversation. So this webinar is about the safety of our foods. On this day, World Food Safety Day, I think it's important to first ask ourselves, why even focus on food safety? And there are 6 reasons I would like to focus on. And this is going through the literature and preparing for this webinar and speaking to many experts around the world. These 6, I think, should bubble to the top. First, because 600 million people will fall ill each year due to foodborne illness. 420,000 of them will die. And 30% of those will be children under 5. 75% of these, the illnesses will mostly be in Africa and South and Southeast Asia. Because foodborne illness, the second reason is because foodborne illness is simply underreported. And the safety of our food in general is a neglected, critical public health problem. With urbanization and shifting dietary patterns, food safety only promises to become a worse issue. Thirdly, because over $110 billion is thought to be lost each year in productivity and medical expenses resulting from unsafe food in low and middle income countries. We are focused on food safety because a dedicated day to food safety helps shine a light on these numbers, but we don't have many. These numbers are the only ones we have, but they're nearly 10 years old. These numbers, the food system is rapidly changing underneath these numbers, and there is a serious underinvestment in better understanding the scope of the problem of foodborne illness in low and middle income countries. So we dedicate a day to food safety because we know we need to know more about it. If we don't measure it, we can't fix it. And if we don't measure it, we can't invest in it. We focus on food safety because it affects everyone. It's everyone's problem. Public, private, health, food experts, the food system, farmers, food processors, wholesalers, retailers, but most importantly, it's a problem for consumers, for all of us. And sadly, and most critically, for those who already bear the largest burden from poor nutrition. Finally, we support a dedicated day for food safety because foodborne illness is preventable, and there are ways to abate those illnesses. So today, I host a lively discussion with a distinguished panel of experts and opinion leaders from around the world. Professor Olugbenga Ben Ogumwela is a founder and executive director of the Consumer Advocacy for Food Safety and Nutrition Initiative in Nigeria. Gbenga is a recognized expert in food chemistry and product development. Since 2006, he's been a professor of food science and technology at Bells University of Technology in Nigeria. Gbenga brings research, academic, and private sector experience, a fascinating blend of theory and practice when it comes to food safety. And Gbenga, we are fortunate that he is an EatSafe partner and part of our advocacy network in Nigeria. Priya Prakash is zooming in from India. She has dedicated herself to ensuring every child in India grows up healthy. She is recognized as a young leader and is the founder and CEO of Health Set Go. You can find Priya giving TED Talks and has received a multitude of awards: Forbes 30 Under 30, the Cartier Women's Initiative Award, the Global Citizen Prize, and is recognized as a global shaper with the World Economic Forum. And little that few know is she's also a state Olympic weightlifting champion. So watch out for Priya. Keep an eye on her. Mohamed Nasser joins us from Senegal. Mohamed and I were fortunate to have a pre-call to this webinar where we exchanged some fascinating observations on what is happening in traditional markets in West Africa under COVID-19. Mohamed is the Regional Food Safety and Quality Assurance Advisor for West and Central Africa for the World Food Programme. He provides technical advice to 19 countries in the region to instill global food safety assurance systems, coordinate capacity in food safety, and sensitize both public and private sector actors in the food system to the importance of safety and quality. Welcome to you all. Today, we will be discussing the importance of food safety in general, but more specifically in the traditional markets where food safety guidelines, standards, regulations, laws are usually not present. Making safe, nutritious food more desirable, available, and affordable is what GAIN does. And perishable nutritious foods, when not produced, stored, handled, or prepared with best safe practices in mind, can contain harmful bacteria, viruses, mycotoxins, chemicals, mechanical contaminants, and physical hazards, resulting in illness, injury, and far too many times death. As GAIN, we know that food safety, nutrition, and food security are inextricably linked. Unsafe food creates a vicious cycle of disease and malnutrition, particularly affecting infants, young children, the elderly, and the sick. For GAIN, if food is unsafe, it cannot nourish. I would like to direct your attention to a short film and a few words from our Executive Director, Lawrence Haddad.
1 in 6 people will experience foodborne illness every year. 420,000 people will die. For children under the age of 5, they're 4 times as likely to experience foodborne disease. And in Africa, the incidence of foodborne disease is 27 times as high as it is in Europe and North America. Hello, my name is Lawrence Haddad. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, or GAIN. And June the 7th is World Food Safety Day. Pandemic or no pandemic, food safety is an issue for everybody, every day. And GAIN is very proud to be working, as I said, with USAID and all our partners to address this issue. All on behalf of myself and behalf of all my GAIN colleagues and partners from around the world, I wish you a good World Food Safety Day. I want you to stay safe and eat safe. Thank you.
So continuing on, and thank you, Dr. Haddad, for spending the time to pull together that important message. We all sort of struggle with that happy World Food Safety Day, but it is very worth mentioning. So A little bit about EatSafe. So we're now moving from food safety over to the EatSafe project. So EatSafe is a 5-year program gathering what we know about safety of food, the safety of the food supply, the enabling environment, and the ground that the safety of foods and the demand that consumers have, or knowledge that consumers have, to shape those traditional markets where the poor are sourcing their foods and the nutritionally vulnerable. It is a 5-year project working with and consumers in traditional markets to best understand how they can most influence the foods they eat day in and day out. EatSafe is currently working in Nigeria, and we have recently added Ethiopia. We are grateful to USAID in Washington, D.C. and the missions that beginning in 2009, they have deliberately and uniquely put food safety, consumers, and traditional markets on the development agenda as part of their Feed the Future initiative. We are inspired and grateful to the federal government of Nigeria and the Kebbi state and local government actors, including the governor himself, who have requested and welcomed our presence. We work with them as partners to co-develop and improve the health and safety of foods purchased by consumers and sold by vendors. Now, EatSafe is led by GAIN, but we cannot do it alone. Our partners are working with us to collect samples in markets, to interview vendors and consumers, to summarize what we know and what we do not, and crafting stories and images to shine a light on the depth of the problem before us. Over the year, EatSafe has worked with our local GAIN offices to track behaviors of vendors and consumers in 10 traditional markets across 5 countries during this horrific global pandemic. So far, markets and their leaderships have proven to be resilient and moving forward despite the challenge of episodic transportation lockdowns, limited and unpredictable hours, and super spreader environments that are dense with the dense populations and poor hygiene services. Thank you to the International Livestock Research Institute. They're helping us better understand the scope of the problem. And Pierce Mill, our partner dedicated to education through entertainment. Pierce Mill brings faces and names into our work, and I would like to share just one of Pierce Mill's creations with you right now.
Market, like many seen around the world, serving both rural and urban consumers. People will come from miles around to do their daily shopping, assuming that what they will buy for their families is safe to eat.
My name is Valisha Danlami. I go to the market to buy the food. How many children do I have? I have 4 of them. The food I make for them, that it make them sick, is my mind. They was going to toilets every time. That is why I don't cook that food in my house, because I don't want to experience that thing again.
Sunan da na maimaita da kaina kamar na farko dai sunana da na baku Alhaji Musa Bebeji. Ina sai da cabbage, green pepper, green beans, carrot, cucumber, beetroot, radish, mint leaf, parsley, celery, spring onions. Wannan kayan da na fara siyarwa na kai shekara 7 kenan ina sai da wannan kaya.
The vendors here are entrepreneurial, resilient, and hustle each day to show off their wares. It's important to their livelihoods that the food they sell is safe.
Mun je kasuwar Talata market. Akwai kayan da na siya sai da na je kasuwa ma na juye shi sai na ga ya ruba da yawa sai na samu yara na ce to su tsince duk wani ya ruban.
Food safety, nutrition, and food security are all bound together. Around the world, markets like this provide access to highly nutritious but perishable foods. But foodborne illness can jeopardize it all. The impact of our public health, nutrition, and agricultural investments, the livelihood of vendors, and most critically, the health of our children.
I buy many things for my children. When I buy the food, this thing that they love to eat.
Masu saya min kaya suna da muhimmanci sosai game da ni saboda duk mutumin da ya san mutuncin kasuwa ya rike kwastoma sosai.
They like to help me with the food. She help me to peel the mangi and pound the pepper for me. She always be there when anytime that I want to cook the food. She help me a lot. She said, "Mommy, I want to test the food because I know that the food is okay." She said, "Mommy, your food is good." I will tell her, "Okay, thank you. When you grow, this is how you'll be cooking for me." She said, "Okay, Mommy, I'll cook the food for you."
Traditional markets play critical roles in feeding and nourishing the world. They can and should always be a hub of safe, nutritious food. USAID is investing in food safety research, working with governments, supply chains, vendors, and consumers to help make every bite as safe and nutritious as it can be.
Hello again. I hope you enjoyed the film. It brings me right back to the challenge in front of us, and my love for these markets. You know, they are culture, they're hubs of activity, they're a community center, and they are critical to make safe. So now we'll move into the Q&A part of the discussion. And what I would like to do is turn to each of the panelists and first get your reaction to the film. And then I have one question that I think I appreciate you just sort of giving a little bit of depth to. So Gabenga, first to you. First, I would appreciate understanding, like, what did you see there in that film? And I understand you're a behavioral specialist in addition and doing a lot of advocacy work. And this mom appears to be very, very, you know, she's tuned into the safety of our food, and unfortunately it's because of an adverse event. But, I imagine she's unusual. And what will it take to change others' behaviors in these environments where the consumer and vendor behavior may be all that we have to shape the market towards safer foods? Over to you, Benga. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. One thing that I like, which was very aptly captured in the video, is the statement that food safety, nutrition, and food security are all bound together. There's no doubt that the attempt by some nutritionists to say, look, let's just focus on getting nutrition, without any consideration for food safety cannot work. In a world where millions go to bed hungry every day because they don't have access to food. We need to change the narrative by actually ensuring food security. But there can be no food security if the food is unsafe and waste issues are not addressed. Secondly, I think it's important to mention that traditional and informal markets in Nigeria are extremely important, and they've been part of our landscape since I was a very small boy in the village. And you will see them actually, maybe today they account for more than 70% of the entire food landscape. So you know that they drive the economy, as it were. So this type of focus is important because they are not a daily market. In fact, in urban centers, there are daily markets. But in many of the communities, traditional communities, they are not daily markets. Consumers will generally not buy anything at all that they believe can cause illness. The issue of, for instance, in that video, you saw the issue of the woman saying, I made moi moi, and the problem came. The problem did not come from moi moi. The problem probably came from buying purchase of beans that had sniper. Sniper is one issue, one agrochemical that NAFDAC has been complaining about in this environment because of the wrong use. And they're very lucky because many families have actually died from media reports, whether from beans or from cassava. So that's a very important issue. But another thing that comes out very strikingly in the video is that the mother makes the purchase decision in the home. So the mother needs to be properly educated. The mother needs to know what is right and what is wrong. And this woman demonstrated that by saying, look, I will only buy what I'm sure of for my children. I will not go outside of that. The other side of that coin is that the vendor knows exactly what, he did some sorting. He said he got people to sort out the fruits and the products for him because he noticed that some were rotting. You will also understand that we are talking of traditional markets where when they have sorted them, they're not going to dispose of them. Some people still come back to buy these things even because they are more affordable. Because there's, so there's a whole gamut of issues around all of these things. But definitely handling and storage are very, very important issues. And if consumers, but I believe that overall, at the end of the day, my own take on this is that the consumer is central to this because it's a demand and supply issue. If consumers begin to push for a cleaner and safer product, vendors are going to respond positively. Thank you.
Thank you, Kabenga. Thank you so much. Some really important points there. And I think this whole idea of the mother being educated, sometimes that education can come from formal institutions, and a lot of times it's passed down through family. And I think that whole the whole importance of the intergenerational trends issue here should come to the top. I'm going to turn to Priya. Priya, just like Kabenga, I'd love to have your first reactions to the film. But the circumstances are, of course, different in India. You're a voice and a leader, and you're also young. And you can anticipate what the next generation of leaders and mothers will start paying attention to when it comes to the safety of foods. What are the messages that will resonate with younger consumers? And who no longer, purchase foods the way perhaps we all have been doing. I know that my family doesn't do it. Things just are showing up at my door and they've been on their phone. So that's what's happening. So are the traditional markets even of concern to the younger generation? And what would it take to put safety in traditional markets on the agenda for the young, new, and emerging customers?
Right. Thanks, Bonnie. So when I saw the video, actually, it really took me back to when I was younger. And just to transport everybody on this call to an Indian traditional market, just like we saw in the video, it's very buzzing. It's like a cultural hub, and there are vendors selling different vegetables and fruits everywhere. Sometimes even flowers, fresh flowers are there in the markets. And I remember accompanying my grandmother and going to these markets, and she would just instinctively go, and let's say she wanted to buy vegetables, she would go and find the vendor just by eyeballing the vegetables, and she would go, she would touch each vegetable, and somehow she would know that this is the right vegetable, and she would know, okay, this is going to go bad in 2 days. And it's just some intuition, instinct, something that she had where she knew instinctively what food safety and what good food was all about. And that was just a great process when I was younger. But as I have, grown older, a lot of those cultural traditions, a lot of those things have actually changed. And what I see now, in my generation, is that this education, like you said, it could be formal or passed down through generations. I don't think that the translation has really happened from, probably my grandmother's or my mother's generation to our generation. I think it's mostly all about the kind of lives that we lead now. And a lot of the lives that we lead now as the younger generation and even across the world are powered by technology, right? And so even until maybe 5 years ago, it would be odd for people to pick up their phones and just place an order and a food shows up at your doorstep. And now even with the pandemic coming into the picture, suddenly you see this big move towards technology. And a lot of people are now, the way they interact with food, I think the process of going to a traditional market has broken down, and now the distance from the traditional market has started increasing for a consumer. So as a young person, if I have to go out and buy food, there are two options for me. Probably my phone, where I can easily get food delivered in less than 30 minutes to my house, or maybe I decide to go out and I go to a supermarket. And these days, supermarkets have infiltrated a lot of communities, urban communities. And so it's very, very accessible for you to go to a supermarket. When you enter, everything is packaged in a beautiful way. You see things in plastic bags. You feel, oh, it's in plastic. It's packaged well. It's probably going to be safe. And unfortunately, that has been the education that currently young people have for food safety. They think it's coming from something known, like a good app or a good supermarket. It's probably going to be safe. But the real knowledge of what food is really about has gone missing. And I think that is where the education is really important. Because today, if you ask a young child who's much younger, when I say the youth, it all starts from even younger than I am. And if you ask them, where does food come from? They probably are, you're going to be disappointed with the answer maybe, because they might say it comes from your phone, or it comes from from a supermarket. But that's not true, right? We have our traditional markets where there are farmers. And today, if you open Google or you open your Google Maps, you'll find the locations for every supermarket in the block. But if you try to find the location for a traditional market, is it even on the map, right? So I think a huge part of it is to put these traditional markets in better touch with consumers. Because when we talk about mothers being educated, I think we represent, maybe mothers of the future, right? Or mothers to be. And the entire next generation is going to be with the youth coming into the picture. So we need to understand that the interaction and the relationship that the new generation, younger generation will have with traditional markets cannot probably not be the same. It probably might have to change. And so we probably need to introduce technology as a means, try to connect and bring these traditional markets on the map, and really educate the youth about what food is about, what food safety is about. And I think that could be a great way to shape the future of traditional food markets.
Thank you. It's like marketing the markets, right? Like we need to market the markets and get them, make them a demand, draw people in, and especially the youth. And perhaps investment will come behind that. I think it's really worth so many important points. Priya, I understand do you live in New Delhi?
Yes.
You live in New Delhi. And so how, the situation in New Delhi is so different from even 30 kilometers outside New Delhi, right? And so tell me, do you have a perspective on how the youth would use traditional markets in a more rural context? Are people on smartphones all over the place? Does this kind of delivery happen? Like, how quickly is this changing?
Yes. So, as I mentioned, I was talking, of course, more about the urban context.
Right.
The way this growing in the last 5 years has been exponential. Early these companies, food delivery companies, supermarkets, they were startups, they were new companies. And you see this exponential growth from them going from 5 cities to 50 cities to 100 cities. And the way they are growing, you'll see the metro cities, tier 1 cities, tier 2 cities, they all now have this kind of a tech-enabled delivery system in place. Of course, most of India lives in the rural belts, so maybe their relationship with traditional markets is still pretty much to walk into a traditional market and buy food, right? But the way I'm projecting this as a, sort of a into the future kind of vision, what I see is the rate of exponential growth of this kind of means. I still do believe that the same relationship, a very physical, traditional relationship exists in the rural segments in India at the moment, most of India, in fact. But this is a trend that cannot be ignored if we need traditional markets to be relevant in the next 10 years. So which is why we need to start the process with traditional markets to get them onto the map now so that, later on, they don't fall behind in terms of direct contact with the consumers.
Yes, thank you. I mean, super insightful and inevitable. I mean, I think this is where India is going. Mohammed, over to you. So initial reactions to the film, and I do have questions that are very WFP. WFP has been incredibly nimble and innovative when it comes to getting food assistance and humanitarian aid to those in need. I mean, some people probably conjure up the notion of WFP in refugee camps and under, in very critical situations. But there is a chronic need for food insecurity that WFP actually also fulfills. And WFP has been using these markets as distribution points, is my understanding. I think even for quite some time for day-to-day sustenance. And so that's a very chaotic environment to try to control food safety. And yet WFP keeps a very high bar on the safety of its foods. So could you give us a little bit of the flavor of how WFP tries to keep food safety on the front in these very, very, very moving environments? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. Actually, when I watch the video, it's very clear for me. It's one of our modality within the World Food Program, how we are supporting humanitarian aid and humanitarian assistance to the people. And because we have clear modality where we are using the markets and small shops to using through, we called it like CPT or cash-based transfers with different modality through voucher or through cash. By the end, yes, this is clear modality for using humanitarian aid, but clearly also we have to, all of us is known and understand that without food safety, there is no food security. This is very clear because the idea is not only to save people and save the people by providing food, but this food should be safe, clear. And this is not like a small demand, this is obligatory, mandatory to be in this way. As you said, WB is always working in crisis. So We have many situations where we are very highly challengeable situation in crisis, where disconnect for the markets, supply chain problems. But I'm just also like to mention to another point, maybe this is a different dimension for food safety issues in this kind of markets. These are three pillars, clearly should be clear. The vendors, where they are responsible to do this. And I'm very happy to see that in the movie, how they really, the vendor responsible for that, he really raised the issue. He knows to wash your hand, he wants to take care of the safety of food. Another pillar related to the consumer themselves, where they go, where they understand how to do, to look for the good safe food, and how to check which is better, how even to do this with which vendor is really safe. But there is another pillars, and which is very important, the government. Government is very important. They play a very important role to go to set a rules, regulation, enforce this regulation into the market, go forward for that. This is clearly, if you ask me now about what WB is doing for this, yes, it is not easy. Clearly, we are dealing in such kind of case to ensure food safety over this kind of markets, where we are really under a lot of stress for the rules may be not completely comply. There is sometimes the vendors is not in the place. Also, they're facing a lot of challenge. Suddenly, we are working in a place where there is no cash movement, no banks destroyed. And I can give you many examples for these cases. Again, we're going the same way that we are doing now. It's like, first of all, we start to have clearly vendors, they are completely reliable. They know the food safety. We start awareness, give them a lot of training about what's the need in the food safety, food quality, how they can save their food, how they keep their food, how they ensure that supply chain of their food also reaching in a right way. So also we're going through control the waste for their products, because we don't need them to lose. Then also we deal with the same at the beneficiary level. We're going also to have a lot of training and capacity building for all the beneficiary about how they know and distinguish this one. We have a lot of mechanisms in the WFB where we can clearly address if there is any problem at the beneficiary level. And believe me or not, within few minutes, I'm not saying I'm few hours, of course, coming directly to say, okay, there is a problem with quality of soya bean or beans or whatever at this market or at this beneficiary. So yes, it's very dynamic, very alert. The other elements we are working with as well is the government. However, it is not like guaranteeing everywhere, because we are working in some places where there is no government in place itself, or maybe the government is not working in very enforcement way. It's still a challenge, but we are doing our best to do this. And in the end, as I said, it is a working together. We believe that no food security, this marks is really resilient in their structure and their place. And we need really all to work together to ensure the food will be reached to the beneficiary. We know that they are not normal consumers where they can go to the market, buy whatever they want. They already affected, maybe displaced, they are moved from wars, from crisis, maybe even natural crisis. So we really focus about that. They nutritionally, they are less states is not completely comply, but also it's not fine as well. But the other side is related to they need this food, and there is no other option. They have only one option. This food, they have to take it very safe. Thank you. Bonnie, you are mute, I think.
That happens to us all, doesn't it? Okay, raise your hand if that has ever happened to you before. So Mohammed, thank you. You know, the World Food Program, it's baskets of food and the volume that it has to move through. You know, there's a lot of emphasis on staples. And there's a lot of emphasis on legumes. And then, you know, and then of course, the fortified foods, which are so critical. You know, the complementary foods, the corn soy blends that are fortified, and that just makes your supply chain even more complicated for food safety and tracing it all the way back. At some point in time, I'd love to sit with your supply chain people to really understand the complexities and how you put a lens of food safety all the way back to local procurement. Right, to local procurement. So thank you, Mohammed. So the conversation now is going to shift a little bit to the pandemic. And turning to that pandemic, you know, how has it been affecting these markets? It's not abating anytime soon. And it sadly will be with us for quite some time, I fear. But USAID had turned to EatSafe in the spring of 2020, so in May of 2020, to develop a COVID response and look at food safety work in markets in 5 countries. So the countries were Bangladesh, Kenya, Nigeria, Tanzania, and Ethiopia, to be eyes on the ground, to know what was going on, to know what behaviors, how was behavior modifying by consumers and vendors due to the pandemic. And we have interviewed over 2,000 vendors and the equivalent of consumers to track what we are seeing and how resilient these markets actually are, and what we're seeing, what we're experiencing, and what are their biggest challenges and how they're modifying. Be the eyes on the ground. And I have to right now give a big thank you to all of our partners who went into very challenging situations. Mohammed, I'm sure the same is true with the World Food Program, working in markets under a pandemic. I also have to give a great thank you to the market authorities. So your issue about governance, the market authorities were welcoming to our data. It's informing some of the decision-making. As you were saying, and Professor said as well, the market authorities, the 3 pieces of consumer, market, vendor, government is really important. So just focusing on what we're seeing in Nigeria, Kenya, and Bangladesh, the COVID-19 safety measures vary widely, the extent to which they're applied and recognized. 85% of the consumers in Kenya saw protocols in place. So they saw active investments in COVID-19 protocol, but 35% in Bangladesh. Now this is changing. Every time we go into the markets, we have different perceptions and it's changing. And what's important is looking at the change over time, the delta. So we've been in there for quite some time to see some change. But by and large, vendors are in favor of better COVID practices, while consumers are finding them difficult to maintain, or in some cases have even gone back to their original purchasing practices, abandoning the COVID-19 PPEs, et cetera. But universally, hand washing stations were most appreciated by both vendors and consumers. And in all 3 cases, the consumers have reduced their frequency of shopping in the markets, they've avoided peak shopping hours, and they've been making greater use where possible of mobile money. So I know we talked about Priya, the use of technology. Mobile money has started to move very quickly in these markets. Let's see, they've shifted in places the types of food they're purchasing, depending of course on price. And price, though reportedly high, particularly for staples, were less so for the eggs, the dairy, and some vegetables. We're not seeing much volatility in price, though high, not much volatility. In some cases, they're not volatile at all. And in some cases, though reportedly there wasn't food in these markets, there has been food in the markets. I think we had one instance where fish wasn't available in Bangladesh. So we are seeing food in the market. It just may be out of reach because of price. So from the vendor's perspective, they're suffering from the absence of customers. And despite having the foods available, they see fewer customers and therefore fewer purchases. And this indeed may reflect a dramatic downturn in income and purchasing power as people are losing their sources of income. They're turning to friends and families for financial support, and innovative finance is needed, but it doesn't seem to be available. So those are some of the observations we've had. The studies will continue in the field through 2021, and with consideration on watching the pandemic to see how we may even increase our observations over time. I know FAO and indeed the WFP are also collecting data when it comes to the availability, the affordability, and the appropriateness of foods. We at GAIN are concerned about that change in the diet. What are they turning to if they're turning away from perishable foods, it's very important that that basket remains nutritious. So questions about the pandemic to the panel. We know about food safety measures and related, what do we know about surveillance in the markets? Is there surveillance in the markets? And do we trust, who do we trust to tell us what's going on and educate us on food safety? So Priya, the trust issue, I think, is a really important question for you going forward and this generation. Who's the trusted voice when it comes to something like food safety in traditional markets or not? But first, turning to Gbenga, do you think that the pandemic-related hygiene measures that have been put in place can help us implement and sustain food safety in these markets? How do we continue to maybe ride this focus on hygiene in general and to benefit the markets greater? And so over the long haul and the nature of COVID-19 in these markets and the intense messaging that has been put in place, there will most likely be COVID fatigue, but there might be something we can hold on to and build on for safety in the markets. I'd love to hear from you on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. In answering that question, let me say very clearly that the market for technology and workplace nutrition is still, unlike the kind of scenario that Priya described, it's still a virgin area in this environment here. Incidentally, I had an experience in interviewing some people who are into the use of technology, especially in Lagos area. And they said what they found was that repeat purchases were very, very few because they found that people said, look, this thing is not affordable. I would rather drive down after work to a traditional market and buy what I want and save maybe 500, 1,000 naira than buy straight from your kiosk, from your display panel. As it were, let me say very quickly that most of the traditional markets that we have in this environment are actually challenged by the fact that some standards are yet to be set. We have, in many cases, people are spreading their wares, their food on mats and what have you in a very sandy area. And when the sun comes, when the winds come, they just blow everything away and all of that. And that creates a problem because you are having to now contend with issues. Say, if you take fruits and vegetables in an environment where you don't have, where there is no workstation. There's no wash station for providing water in the market. There's no concrete flooring. You don't have even any kind of protective facility for your products. Take the example of meat, for example. It's only in the last few years we've begun to see meat vendors actually putting meat in some glass contraptions that are not even standard, but are done to their own convenience. But these are the kinds of changes that are required over time. In responding to the COVID-19, let me quickly say that the experiences you have given in Bangladesh and the other two countries are really a little bit different from what you have in Nigeria. If you look at that video, you will see that you probably saw maybe 2 or 3 people wearing face masks in the market, that actually typifies what you see. In the early days, when the COVID lockdown started, people were wearing, so COVID fatigue is already here in Nigeria. So you will in fact see a situation in which most people don't actually comply when it comes to that. And any education that you are giving to them is like you are overflogging the issue. So How do I think that the market can actually respond for the benefit of the consumer? This takes us back to the issue of awareness and education and in creating improved knowledge. I like the fact that Mohammed talked about vendor training, because this is one of the areas we have to focus on training the vendor. We have to look at how to change attitudes through maybe messaging that will go directly to both consumers and vendors at the market centers. We have to look at, incidentally, the radio jingle is a very effective tool in this environment. And invariably, even infographics in different languages, that as people are approaching these markets, they know the do's and don'ts. But basic infrastructure support is going to be extremely critical if we are going to get people to change attitudes in this kind of environment. And I mentioned the issue of demand and supply before now. If you have a workstation, in the market, and the vendor has access to that, he knows that a consumer is going to demand for some kind of a washed and clean product. He will have to meet that need. And that's one of the ways by which we are going to drive it. Let me just give one or two quick examples. We find, for example, that people are using azo dyes like sunset yellow color, for ensuring that the rich red color of palm oil is brought out, or even for suya, red azo dyes are used to actually give rich red color and all of that. Those are things that if we are able to educate these vendors, educate them on the dangers and the risks associated with this as far as food safety is concerned, then the attitudes are going to change. But basically what they are responding to is a consumer demand. And in doing that, they are going in a way that actually poses more danger to the consumer. And that's one of the things that we actually need to guard against. And one of the things we actually need to find a way to actually address. One thing that comes to my mind very quickly is that in all of these conversations, I said before that the mother is the one that makes the purchase decision in the home. He goes to this market. He doesn't even know anything about the COVID compliance, the protocols, and what have you. But if we do have a situation in which she's made aware of what is required, even the children, if the children come from school and are saying, "Mommy, you can't do this because this is the situation," when you go to the market, wear your mask, wear gloves, and so on and so forth. The likelihood is, this is what our teacher told us, the likelihood is that the mother is going to listen to them because they become some kind of influencers in the home, as we have seen. And in driving that forward, therefore, I believe that the response to COVID has not been good enough, but we can take quite a few things from this particular experience to try to strengthen our traditional markets. And one of the things we can take will be, how will government ensure that basic infrastructure support is provided, or guidelines are provided at these markets to ensure that basic standards can be met, vendors comply to what will make food safe to the consumer, and consumers are reassured at this level. I think these are critical considerations because unless we begin to look at how we can make the food, how we can create the necessary standards and guidelines and ensure enforcement, we are not going to see a change even after COVID, because we're already seeing that trend now.
Thank you so much. A lot there. And, I really welcome the whole idea of the guidelines and the standards. I know that WHO has just recently come out with very helpful guidelines for food safety in traditional markets. So, Mohammed, I'm going to turn to you. I'm asking everyone to keep their responses a little shorter if possible. We do want to leave time for the questions at the end. So, Mohammed, what are you seeing? And, as WFP, and how, how are you how is COVID-19 being accepted in these markets? Are you working to amplify the messages? I imagine you are, of government. And what about this question of price and availability of products you're distributing? What are you seeing happening with price? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bonnie. Just to be very quick about my point is, okay, yeah, I'm of course with all the wallet to saying that we all suffered from COVID-19 all over the world. This is all of that, and really everybody affected. But let's say one of the positive points of COVID-19 actually is just to bring back the basic hygienic requirements to be implemented. I found out it's a bit strange that the people, when we talk about put the mask, clean your hands, whatever, when they talk about this as like a very important thing, this is something basic for any traditional market, anyone working in food. So we are talking about what is supposed to be basic, and we are completely believing to be too safe and to ensure food safety and quality at this kinds of markets as like now requirements to defeat the pandemic, which is not like, for me, is a bit strange, but this is a fact. So, of course, this is what was one of our requirements, even when we deal with this kind of markets in the humanitarian aid. When we giving them training, I clearly said about the vendor, but like the training for the vendor was mainly focusing about this kind of practice, about just clean your hands, ensure there is you keep it in the right way, clean the products. It's like something that we already now doing a lot in COVID-19. I'm happy to have this everywhere, everybody apply. But in the same time, I think this is basic. This should be continued. It's nothing related to COVID-19. It is something related to the fact that we need to ensure safety of the food. And as I said, actually, in our discussion before that, if we look for the numbers of the people, they are already now suffering from food diseases. We are talking about this huge number of 420,000 or also deaths every year. I already shared and worked in a very high crisis in the last 10 years in the world, Yemen, Syria, even Russia, Ukraine, Somalia, Nigeria. But no, this number is unbelievable. We are talking about numbers dying from food safety. There is no compared to the number dying from conflicts of natural disaster. So this is really, should be a very big mark. And as you said, this is 10 years data before. So this is not even something updated. This should be bring a very big mark to everybody in the world at the global level decision-making portfolio to say, no, we have a problem. This is a global problem. So this is my point. And the other point, you're talking about the availability and how it's going to be affected in the availability and the prices of the products. Definitely, what happened during COVID-19, a lot of closing for the market, supply chain affected, moving between the ships. I can't see that now immediately will be happening, but we can feel it really based on the data that we have so far. It's like the fatigue or impact of COVID-19 in the market generally, in the prices of the products. And recently, I think clearly FAO has been raised this, that stable food prices are going to be increased, but it's going to be affected in other also products. Like if we talk about animal sources and the ground sources, everything, or plant sources, everything going to be affecting the prices and the availability, especially if the lockdown going to be come again and increase more, or maybe for a different time. So yes, price and availability will be affected, sure, for sure. To which extent, no one can know. The same like no one can know to when we can get rid out of COVID-19. So this is the same. But the idea is, yes, we need to be prepared. We need to be prepared at all level, at government level, institutional, government organization, academia, consumers, vendors, that this kind of work need to work all together. No one to work alone. We need all to work together to ensure that we will have our food available for everyone in the world. So we will not leave anyone behind.
Very good. Thank you. A very clear message, Mohammed. Spoken as a true WFP, a WFP leader. Thank you very much. Priya, this is going over to you, and it's really a question of the voice for food safety. Where does it come from? How should we think about receiving it? Is the government actually speaking to consumers, or is it the private sector's voice that we're going to be listening to on food safety? Is there a concern about what's going on in these markets? But is there a demand for information about food safety from where you sit? And if there, who is the trusted voice? Who is the trusted voice for the young generation coming, the young consumer?
Yeah, so I think, very honestly, I feel like this voice is missing. This voice to the consumer is not there. And, of course, we have discussed in this conversation about governments talking to vendors, talking to, the entire supply chain. But when it comes to the consumer, unfortunately, food safety is left to chance. Like I said, when something is uncertain, you try to rely on proxies to understand, is this safe or not? And, then we turn to the kind of packaging, the communication, a fancy supermarket. Those are not proxies for food safety, right? But unfortunately, that is what people consider to be proxies for food safety. And so I feel like the young generation definitely wants the government's voice to be heard. I feel like the youth specifically are understanding and educating themselves a lot through what they watch online. There's a lot of awareness in the youth right now, even when it comes to things like food waste, climate change. People are trying to understand that, maybe vegetables are not meant to look perfect all the time. Maybe a real vegetable looks very different from what the coloring, that Professor Gobenga was talking about. So it's a lot to do with education, and the youth is yearning for that education. So I think what the government really needs to do at this point is, of course, to step up when it comes to the vendors. I think we do need, as a consumer, recognizable signs, like what was being said earlier, that, when you walk into a traditional market, what makes you feel safe? What removes the uncertainty from the process of purchasing a vegetable? I think the experience there really needs to be looked at. Do we have recognizable, stamps for a vendor? Do we understand that is this vendor empaneled or not? And I do know, having worked with the regulatory authorities in India, that they did try to educate young people in schools, in colleges, in universities, but there's a huge gap, and I think a lot needs to be done still there. It's just the beginning, but I think these kinds of things will make a huge difference. There needs to be probably a consumer campaign behind this that enables and empowers people to make better decisions once these certifications are put into place. It needs budget. I think it needs money from the government to be put behind this. What I think Mohammed was saying, he said about the masks and the gloves, right? These are basic measures. But I've seen in India, there are events, food safety events, where there have been vendors, and, in India, street food and, street things are so cultural. Everybody loves to really go out on the streets and have these things and purchase vegetables and do all that. But even in these food safety focused events, when these vendors were given masks and gloves, they were given one pair. And when that one pair got dirty, what did they do? They just took it off and they continued with, the regular way of doing things. So, we also need to understand, if we want them to be safe, wear masks, wear gloves, where is that supply coming from? Is there a government provision for this? And all of this will add to the optics. When a consumer walks in, they see that people are wearing masks. So I think these softer aspects of communication, of these safety equipments, I think these are things where the government can be changing their perspective on this post, pandemic, when people actually start stepping out. And another thing about the infrastructure that was mentioned, right? you'll see coming up globally and even in India, the younger generation has started really romanticizing these organic farm to table settings, right? And it sort of harkens back to the traditional markets that we are leaving behind. So I think it's important if those traditional markets were actually upgraded in terms of infrastructure. So it makes it again like what was mentioned, just from an optics perspective, from a better perspective, that the youth actually go there. They are attracted to go there versus to go to the supermarkets. Because right now there's a big supermarket culture that needs to be addressed. So I think all these things will probably come in post-pandemic also, but when people start stepping out. But I think during the pandemic, we can't ignore that there is a way that the youth is engaging in commerce, and that is through technology, through the apps. So if there can be some efforts in making sure that we empower these traditional markets to actually connect with consumers, because definitely affordability is an issue. These apps and these online platforms make it much more expensive than going to the market. But today in India, the COVID situation is so bad that many people just do not want to step out. Of course, there is COVID fatigue, but then there's equal number of people who don't want to step out and go to a market. So we are being bombarded with higher prices through these applications. So I think it's important to, even during the pandemic, take those measures.
Great. Priya, thank you. Once again, what keeps emerging here is the role of the consumer, the power of the consumer, and then what will follow. I do want to bring back your point about how the youth are paying attention to things like climate change. They're paying attention to waste. And all of these have food safety elements to them, of course, right? So food safety doesn't sit over here on its own. Obviously, the climate is impacting the viruses, the bacteria, the proliferation, but also food loss and waste, this huge new emphasis on loss and waste, which is so positive. We really have to be careful because some food needs to be thrown away. It needs to be thrown away. It's dangerous. And it's nuanced. We have to have a very nuanced conversation about this. Unfortunately, or fortunately, because it's raised it up, we're having this conversation. We also need to go a bit deeper from where I sit. So I'm going to jump to our final question, and it's related to this whole idea of the traditional market. I sit in on a lot of conversations, I'm listening to the chatter, and I'm hearing in some cases, experts are saying, shut them down, shut them down. Shut down those traditional markets. They're really a problem. Now, others, of course, are saying, actually, it's a portion of that market. Let's strengthen them. So I just, as a final question, I would like to get, and please stay as tight as possible, maybe each just a few minutes. What do you hear? What do you feel when an, quote, expert says, shut them down? Okay, so Priya, to you first. Thank you.
So I believe that anybody saying that traditional markets should be shut down, that's not reality. I think traditional markets are not going anywhere. They are definitely the core of the supply chain. So I think this is not the right notion. I do believe that our relationship with traditional markets will change, but traditional markets are not going anywhere. There might be a different way that they interact with consumers, with businesses, with technology companies, but traditional markets would always be at the heart of any food system.
Thank you very much. Mohammed, over to you, and then Professor Gambenga, you will be the last. So, Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. Okay, so actually, traditional market will be there, is there already before even we will say. Once we are a human being, have been found in the earth, we have traditional market. I believe in this and never to be ended. I just came now to my experience that the time that I was working in North Korea, Pyongyang, every week we used to go to the supermarkets as the exhibits. There is a few supermarkets there, but if every week we have to go to the traditional market in Pyongyang, North Korea, where we buying our vegetables, fruits, meat, and so on. So even in North Korea, the black spots in the wall is already there. But what we need to do for the traditional market to do is also coming to my experience, clearly in my mind now, experience I had in South Tunisia before with International Labour Organization when I was working as a project coordinator for decent jobs, where we went to rehabilitate village markets. It was market where it's happening every day, every week, 1 day per week. And I remember very well, first day we have been there to assess everything. It was like everybody was in the streets. They are just sitting in the main streets of the deep village. And then once we start to build the market, it was an area of land where we rehabilitated, put some sheds over, some washing places, toilets, and so on. Of course, yeah, regardless that we have spent like 2 months or more to give this idea to vendors and also to the consumer, because they believe that if they go inside this market, no one going to sell from them or buy from them. So it was like this. So it takes time. But by the end, the good point that when we, after we did the study, we found out that how the people, first of all, they keep the market completely clean for almost all the time that the project, for 2-3 years. They take care of it, how the street will be very open for all the cars to go in and out, even the people to move in. Yeah, it's completely improvement happen, and it's not improvement only for the people, but it reflects often for this village. So people start to think about, okay, let's do together to do something given. And we have really after like 2-3 years, I visited the same village, and I was really surprised when I saw how many of group and initiatives has been done between the villagers together to improve something more. So clearly this is the impact. This is what we need to do. We need to work together to improve the traditional market up to the level that we expect. This will be sure, food safety and equality will be the main core for that, but also they're giving a lot of awareness for the people. So really we need to work now, not tomorrow, because clearly that the traditional market is, as mentioned prior, one of the core of the supply chain. But I clearly say the major stage of supply chain that we never talked about. We talked about transportation. We talked a lot to improve the storage. We talked a lot about to improve the overseas movement, but we didn't talk about this one. And the traditional market is one of the stages of supply chain that we rely on to receive, to send the food down up to the final consumer.
Thank you, Mohammed. Professor Gabenga, final over to you. And we only have about 3 minutes, and then we're going to turn it to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. I think I agree absolutely. Well, I disagree with those who think that traditional markets don't have a future. On the contrary, I think what we need to do is to start looking at how we will reshape these markets. These markets need to be reshaped. We need to build nutrition and food safety education into the system. We need to identify the critical needs and priorities across the landscape and ensure that policies actually speak to this, embrace these markets, because these markets are not going to go away for a very long time. And we can turn things on the head by actually making them, by upgrading the facilities in these markets. Secondly, I would suggest, I had the privilege last year of engaging with the Vice President of Nigeria on what Kapsani has been doing. And I did say that clearly across the globe, you will see that the consumer is not given a voice. The consumer must be given a voice in actually helping to shape these markets. What do we think are the priorities? So definitely, to answer your question, I believe that yes, the markets need to be shaped. Traditional markets are not going to go away for a long time. And I've had the privilege of in the last 1 or 2 years, teaching even SMEs, many of whom go to exhibitions and to these markets to sell. So, I've had the privilege of actually sharing basic nutrition and food safety training with them. And it's amazing how much transformation that comes out of a 2-day training and the way that they are going to be able to pass this awareness to their interactions across the chain. And I think these are the kind of things that we need to begin to look at how to do moving the conversation forward. Thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you, Gabenga. I think this is several times now you've talked about, there's food safety, but there's all the influencers. There's children, there's mothers, there's government. And again, it goes back to, it's everybody. It's everybody's problem. And sometimes when these things are so enormous, it's sort of no one knows where to grab on. So thank you. We will keep trying to provide that direction. I think universally we're saying that's ridiculous to think about shutting these things down. They're not going anywhere. We need to strengthen them. We need to modernize them. We need to make them, make them, we need to market them. They need to be in demand. Priya, I think that was one of your original points. So thank you very much. So we now have time for only a few more questions from the chat. And unbeknownst to the audience, there's a whole team of people behind this webinar. Rishi Banerjee now joins us. He's been following the Q&As. And so Rishi, hopefully you've been able to cluster some of those questions, and we will turn to the panelists. Maybe just raise your hand, panelists, if you'd like to actually chime in onto one of the questions that Rishi will bring up. Thank you, Rishi.
Great, thanks, Bonnie. And a huge thanks to all of our panelists here today and to the audience joining. Sure, so our first question, basically it emphasizes the role of education. And there's also this pretty well documented disconnect between knowledge and behavior. So the question is, how does GAIN, but also other partners in the international development community leverage applied behavioral science and risk reductive behaviors to address some of these concerns? And what are the strategies and what's currently being done? Over to the panel.
Thank you, Rishi. Professor Gabenga, maybe you want to take a first crack at this issue of behavior and risk reduction. And how do we begin to apply behavioral principles?
Thank you, Bonnie. Let me say that in my own experience, what I have seen in this environment is that people respond. It's not just a question of knowledge. Yes, behavior is shaped very often by, number one, what I call message reinforcement. Number two, the way in which the message is actually communicated. If, for example, where you have consistently heard something as radio jingles saying, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, the message becomes very clear, right, even at the household level. So the way the message is communicated, the champions, maybe we need to be able to identify role models and food safety champions, especially, for example, entertainment, star artists in the entertainment industry. They are, who can be seen as role models in particular areas, are actually used as, to campaign. And in fact, I've seen a situation in which open air videos are actually used to transmit to these markets and they shape discussion. So definitely, I believe that behavior can be changed. It's not just by creating the knowledge, but also by actually demonstrating it and by reinforcing the messages across the landscape. Over to you.
Thank you, Professor Gabenga. Rishi, next question, please.
Great. So our next question relates to COVID-19 safety protocols and PPE, and maybe how some of that might be helpful for for improving food safety practices in these markets. The question / concern is, particularly in environments like in Africa, Southeast Asia, where the temperature can be very, very high and it can be quite uncomfortable, and you have a lot of negotiations, haggling, bartering. How can we get how can we reinforce some of these PPE protocols in those kinds of environments? How do we show that kind of benefit for these vendors who may be skeptical just given their environments?
Mohammed, I'm going to turn that to you since you actually spend a lot of time in these markets, but we at GAIN also are using best practices adopted all over the world. The consolidation and the use of better spacing, less crowding, more traffic, better traffic flow, things that really limit the density. Density is an issue. And so and by the way, with GAIN, the door, people are knocking at our door, architects knocking at our door. Now, who would have thought that architects are a nutrition intervention? Well, we do. And in fact, there are better ways to design these markets to be safer, not only under a pandemic, but widening the area, more space. There's a lot of things we can think of doing as we are trying to strengthen the markets. But Mohammed, please, you've probably been in there quite recently.
Okay, thank you very much, Bonnie. Yeah, let me to expand the idea itself, like the practice of food safety and the different key players into this. So we have, I just will pick quickly idea like farmers, how we can convince the farmers not to use pesticides huge amounts, how to use them to do that, to use the harvesting practice in the right way, and so on. So I'm just want to, if you look for food safety practice as generally, is all of them is some mainly depending in convincing behavioral changes for the people they do this business, so starting from the farmers, from the fisheries, from the butcher, and so on. So it's like a very big way. I'm not talking about corporate level, I'm talking about the small producer into the system. So this happening, yes, of course, and we need to do that. But then the point of food safety related to the pandemic, how we can put it in a right way to pave the way to us to move this forward into this way. I can see it needs first of all to see the behavior of the point. Like, yeah, in Africa, the weather is very hot. The people not easily to be convinced to using masks or to using something. And I'm happy to hear from Priya what they are saying, that one bucket will be finished and then a new they will not use anymore. They will continue. So yeah, we need to study this. We need to study based on my experience into this kind of markets. First of all, what we did, we went down. We met with the people, we meet with the vendors, ask them what they prefer, what is the situation. Not something like you put rules and say you have to do 1, 2, 3. It's not SOP, it is not checklist, you go and do that. No, we need first of all to know what's the behavior, what they're looking for, how we can manage it. I believe 100% food safety best practice can be customized based in the situation of each group. This is the idea. This is how we can really move forward. It is not something you can put it in one guidelines will be applicable in everywhere in the world. No, definitely not. It's something need to be customized based on each situation. By the end, our target and objective should be good hygiene, good best practice for the food safety, how they can implement it in the right way, and by this we can move forward to the next stage to have more and more practice into the system. But start with this, and again, I just want also to mention to this point, using of the community leaders, the big groups into this village and traditional market. I believe in each traditional market, we have some people, they manage this market to put the rules, to say how we have to work with these people. By working with them, we first of all understand what exactly their points, give them clearly what they need. We need to feel exactly for their points. We just come to put the rules. We need them first to understand what we are looking for, and then we move forward to what they can implement.
Right. And, Mohammed, the same is true with how we establish infrastructure in these markets, because we need to know how infrastructure is used, how it's demanded. We don't want to be putting in, as we call them, white elephants from the very start. How do people want to use technology? What's their capacity to even use these technologies? And that is critically important for the location, for the design, et cetera. Rishi, one more maybe, and then we'll do a closing. Thanks.
Great. So this question's probably for Priya, but as we think about this need to strengthen the technology infrastructure at the markets and digitize them, what challenges do you foresee in terms of modernizing markets, particularly in rural areas? Do you think there will be questions, skepticism, reluctance to adopt some of that? Your perspectives.
Yes, thank you for that question, Rishi. I think what I have seen in the last almost a year and a half of the pandemic is that the way commerce is done has fundamentally changed for a lot of people. There were previously unbanked populations that have now got a bank account, and they have moved to digital money. And this, at the core, how people exchange money is, I think, a very key start point for a lot of things. You'd be also surprised the kind of push that technology has, even in India, even with the pandemic. There is one app, there are two apps that have been recommended by the government of India, and only through those apps can you enter and exit certain venues. Can you apply for your vaccination? And these apps are universally applicable for anybody and everybody, sort of transcending socioeconomic boundaries. Of course, there are some people who struggle with it. People in the rural segments who do not even have a mobile phone. But then a large chunk of the population has started operating this way in a very accelerated, unprecedented span of time, right? So I think the first basic thing that traditional markets can probably really empower themselves with is the entire concept of digital money and transactions. I think the whole concept of cash being given, which was a typical operating principle in these traditional markets, probably is changing rapidly. I see a lot of people accepting digital payments, street side vendors. It's become a bit commonplace in the urban areas. There are a lot of transportation means as well, which are local, where there are what we call auto rickshaws. People pay in cash, but even they have started getting digitized, right? And a bit of the contribution to that digitization is through the private sector pushing. So for example, if there are private sector players that are coming into the mix, they have more of an incentive to make sure that all of these people are online, right? Because that just means better business for them. And so it's been an interesting play, I feel, where they have digitized themselves, and in the end, they are benefiting from this process because the consumer doesn't want to pay cash, and they are being incentivized because, like what Professor Gabenga was saying, he said that everyone plays to the consumer, right? So if the consumer is wanting digital, that is where the people will go. They'll figure out a way, to make that happen. And I think that is where people are coming. The demand equals the supply. And I think that is a good starting point from a traditional market perspective. Just be online, try to be, well located in terms of even things like Googling a market, right? I mean, these are basic ways. And then I feel going forward, there will be a transition where a lot of these farmers, a lot of these vendors will be empowered enough to sell directly online or represent themselves directly online. That is going to take a long period of time. It's not going to happen now, which is why I said, we're looking at this decade of technology transformation, but, till 2030. But the way that it's happening, it might even happen sooner. So I do feel like that's what's the future direction.
Great. Thank you, Priya, giving us a dose of what the future is going to be and where we're all headed. Folks, we have very little time, but I do want to give some closings and some thank yous. What I clearly heard is consumer demand can shape these markets. Thank you everyone for joining. Behind the scenes, thank you to Worldly Wise and our partners at LEDAR Communication, our GAIN colleagues around the world, and WHO for carrying this event, Pierce Mills, ILRI, all of our partners, and for the behavior question, our new partner, Busara Center. So everyone, thank you so much. Please stay safe and eat safe. Goodbye, everyone.
you.